Hi, everybody. Good morning, and welcome to Urban Fantasy PH. Now, while urban fantasy is a subgenre in books, I chose that to be the name of our podcast because we live in an urban society. And as writers, creatives, and artists, we give readers and consumers wish fulfillment by the way of our stories, which is in a way fantasy, but reflective of reality. And lastly, PH, because that's where we live, and here is where we create. My name is CJ Edmonds, and this is episode 5. Our guest for today is the president and CEO of the Vineyard Brand Consultancy. This is a brand consultancy firm that aims to be a strategic partner to entrepreneurs, companies, as well as their respective brands. Now, the firm may be a new player in the market or in the field, but Leonard is also a new writer on the block, or more like a new poet on the block, who released his first book of poetry, a collection of his works entitled When the Autumn Star Shines. And from where we're sitting, it looks like his star is just about getting ready to shine a little bit brighter. So let's say hello and give a warm welcome to Mr. Leonard Grape.
Hi,
Hello.
CJ, and to
Hi.
everyone who's watching this. Great to be here, and thank you for having me, CJ.
Most welcome. Most welcome. We're glad to have you on board and glad that you're here to join us. And thank you for being here and taking the time in spite of your busy schedule. We really appreciate it. Now, this is not the first time that we actually talked or met because we actually met during a team building that me and my colleagues had with Mellow 94.7 some years back, which is still my other job, if in case you guys are interested, you want to know. You were with Ayala, and wait, the name of the venue escapes me now. Was it Sandbox?
It was Sandbox. It was
Okay, right.
Sandbox in
During that
Adventure
time,
Park.
right. Were you already into poetry when I met you back in during the Sandbox days?
Yeah, and it's really nice that you remember that. Those are some of the fun times we had, right? But yeah, to answer your question, I was already writing poetry at the time. In fact, it goes way, way back. The fascination with words started as early as when I was in high school.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I only just started trying to write more seriously in terms of my poetry when I started
Okay.
working for Yala. As ironic as it sounds, but that's where I started really trying to dig deep into my poetry. So during those times, though, I was just writing it more as an outlet and a creative pursuit. But nothing to be released to some audience, or not even, of course, to come up with my own poetry book collection. But yeah, I've been writing poetry for quite a while now,
Quite a
CJ.
while. Okay. Can you give us a background of what you do exactly with the firm for those who are interested?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Knowing that I used to work with Ayala Land back then, I was a marketing executive and a corporate manager. But recently, I started my own company. It's called the Vineyard. I'm the CEO, so I do a lot of branding works, meaning we
Mhm.
help startup founders and entrepreneurs in terms of strategizing on how more effectively create and build their brands. So
Mhm.
right now, I'm trying to build up the company with our team, getting to help more startup founders and entrepreneurs to become more successful in terms of their business ventures. So in
Okay.
a nutshell, we're a company that offers branding services to the entrepreneurial community in the country, CJ.
All right. Was poetry something that you gravitated towards, or was it something that you discovered?
Oh, that's an interesting question, and I don't think I've ever thought of an answer to that. But I think it's something that came out naturally, not in terms
Okay.
of skill, but in terms of emotional connection to that
Okay.
art.
All right.
Meaning, I was really someone who's always in deep thoughts, as they would say sometimes to me, and has always been fascinated with words. So to me, it's not really gravitating towards the art, but it's more of the art becoming a part of who I was, even without realizing at the onset that it was something that I wanted to do as a creative outlet. So
Oh, okay.
meaning, it came out to me naturally, I guess, and then I just tried to learn more and then hone it as I went along.
Right. As they say, it's either you find the art or the art finds you. So in this case, I guess in a way, it's that. Poetry is defined as another form of literature and storytelling, that uses rhymes as a way of propelling its own form of narration. Why do you think poetry is not as mainstream as modern day fiction or literature? And do you think there's a way to turn this around?
Well, now with the digitalization, I think that's one discussion that would have different answers. But to me, poetry can now really come into various forms and categories, to the extent that some may actually have a blurred line as to what you really consider as poetry, if I may.
True.
There's a
Right,
lot of
right.
Instagram poets right now, and there's a lot of content available online. But I think poetry, to its truest form, is something that can connect to the readers at a much deeper level, and it becomes differentiated from other types of literary forms in a way that, to me, poetry would always have a sense of meaning and a lot of urgency, in terms of its structure and messaging. I hope I answered that in a way that it's not too complicated or technical.
No, no, no.
Did I answer your question, CJ?
There are no wrong answers here in the show.
Okay,
So
okay, okay.
whatever answer that feels true to you, then that's the answer that we're gonna accept. If in
Yeah.
case, how should one begin making poetry mainstream? And it certainly is a challenge for a lot of poets, young or seasoned poets that have come before you or wanted the same thing. I was wondering, who would you cite as the major influence in your work, and what is it about their work that made you gravitate towards their work?
Yeah, thanks for that question, CJ. I'd like to believe I'm a poet. I'm a contemporary poet nurtured by the classics. So
Okay.
I really started reading the likes of Shakespeare, Pablo Neruda, um, and then other classic poets. Rainer Maria Rilke is one of my major influences. And I think
Mm-hmm.
what really inspired me to be influenced by them is the way they really tackled poetry as a personal and very intimate form of art,
Mm-hmm.
meaning it's unlike right now. I think there's a lot of opportunity to really try and go mainstream, but I've handled my poetry more as a really personal outlet. So as Shakespeare would write, Shakespeare influenced me in terms of the respect to the poetic forms. I write a lot of sonnets. I like to write in structural manner, while Rilke really taught me how to try to dig deep within yourself, to find the artistry of your own voice in poetry. And one
Mm-hmm.
thing that he said that really impacted my artistic pursuits, not just poetry but in many other forms, is when he said that sometimes one of the shallowest thing you can do to your art is to try to seek validation from the people who don't really do your art. So
Ah,
those are the people that really influenced me. Pablo Neruda, obviously, because of his romanticism and love poems. And the other one is John Keats. Again, those two
okay.
are my influence in terms of uh,
Keats.
love poems. So
Yeah.
a lot of classic poets, CJ, that really influenced me. But yeah, modern day poets, I think Atticus is one. When I tried to venture also having my own IG poetry page, but
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
mainly it's really the classics.
It's
I
made
could
the
never go
classics.
wrong with the classics. Yeah.
True, true. I'm glad that you mentioned validation, because that's also one of the questions I would usually ask other people that I get to talk to, whether they be a writer or not. But mostly people in the arts. With regards to validation, do you feel that you validate yourself by way of your work, or it's better that if validation comes from some other person outside who views your work and gets to sample your work?
I'd like to answer perhaps, CJ, but by putting a premise first on how I see validation. To me, when we talk about validation, it has to be really more of a reward to what you are already doing, but
Mm-hmm.
not something to put a judgment or to put a qualification to your artistry. If that's
Okay.
the case, I've always felt that it's great to receive validation from other people, more particularly from your readers. That's speaking based on my own experiences. When I was writing my poetry, particularly my book When the Autumn Star Shines, there was really never an intent to find validation from readers. But of course, at the end of the day, we are authors. We want to be able to reach our readers and be able to relate to them in a way that they can find meaning also from our works.
Mm-hmm.
So finding validation from the readers, I think, is a great reward. That's how I take it. Knowing that the effort, the time, the sacrifices that you put into a creative work was all worth it at the end of it. At the end of it all.
Right. I like that you said that you also have to take into account how you define validation. But I guess also from the onset is also, as a creative person, do you create in order to seek validation, or do you create because this is a way to express yourself? And I guess that is one question that is left to the creator themselves to answer, right? Why do you write?
Yeah,
Why do you sing? Why do you perform? Why do you write poetry? Why do you write novels? Who do you do it for, right?
yeah,
And that's a question that no one can answer except us as the creator, right?
I agree. I agree.
Yeah. So much has been said about what poetry is and what it can or cannot do. Do you think that poetry can provide some sort of fantasy fulfillment for readers and as a means of escape from the harsh reality of the real world?
I'll answer definitely 110% yes, CJ. Both as a writer and as a reader of poetry, that resonates very true to me. In fact, the way I started poetry was to really find my own escape.
Okay.
I normally write poems towards the latter part of the evening when I feel like the world is shut down, it's quiet around, and finally I get to have a time for myself. Uh, I've read a number of poems that really bring me to different, different spheres of life, different spheres of fantasy, as you may want to use the term. I think poetry, as similar to other literary forms, can bring that effect, albeit in a different manner and impact, I guess. But when you read poems, depends also on the type of poetic genre you're reading. But generally, I'd like to believe that poetry has that power to bring you into a different sphere of your universe.
Hmm.
And that's my own experience also. I'll normally read poetry, to find a different type of world. Like where I am right now, it's very different from my regular life of being a corporate, a startup CEO. But when I start talking about poetry, it always feel a certain energy that is not usual with your day-to-day regular urban life, CJ.
Right. Speaking of harsh reality, there is nothing more serious, immediate, and of course sad than the pandemic that we're all dealing at the moment. And yet, in spite of that, you were able to release your first book last year during the pandemic, right? So,
Well,
what made you?
actually, the go ahead, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I was wondering what made you decide to release it last year, and how long did it take you to write the book?
Yeah. Actually, the actual printed version came out much earlier, but I decided to release a special edition last year.
Okay,
So to
all right,
answer your question, I decided to release another version last year. It's a special ebook edition as a way to try to give support to our frontliners or modern day heroes who really got affected also by the pandemic last year. But the first time I launched it was way back in 2017, if I can share that. In terms of writing the book, the thing was I wasn't really trying to write a book, CJ. So I
okay,
really didn't have, like a set timeline, but it was a collection of my works for the past, I think at that time around 5 years. The interesting experience I had was by when I decided to try and write and really publish a book. The first thing I did was really look back at all my works. And to my surprise, or probably not that much of a surprise, there was an underlying common theme from that book or from my works. But from the time that I made the decision to really seriously try to make that as a project, it probably took me about 6 months of real work, finding a publisher, editing the works, doing the collection, thinking of a title, designing the book cover, up to the actual publication and launch. So, but of
right.
course, the way I produced the work was much more long, was much more longer during that
Um,
time.
is the title also one of the poems inside the collection, or where did the title come from?
Yeah, there wasn't a title poem, meaning that there wasn't a poem that carries the title of the book. but the title, I think, underscored the overall essence of what the book was all about. When
Mm-hmm.
the autumn star shines came from my fascination with things that are celestial, obviously. So that's why the star is there. Autumn star is actually a phenomenon. It's known as the loneliest star in the galaxy because
Okay.
it only comes out at certain time of the year, towards the tail end of the summer, and only in certain parts of the globe, because it sort of signals that the summer has ended and another season, which is a very sad season for me, autumn, is about to come. So one of the main themes of my
Actually,
book
for me,
is solitude.
I love autumn. It's just this, it's just a tragic fact, a tragic thing that we don't have it here in Manila.
Yeah. I don't think I've seen like a legitimate autumn, but it's always been something that's meaningful to me at some level, you know. But yeah, autumn star, because that's the main one of the main themes. But at the end of it, I wanted the book to be a platform or an avenue where you can deal more intimately with your solitude, with issues like death, and loss. But at the
Mhm.
end of it, I want it also to be, a source of positivity. That's why Shines is there, because still Shines, carries a lot of positivity and brightness to it. So that's more or less how the book title came about. But that was towards the tail end process. Meaning, once I had the book, I understood what it was about, what it was for me, what it can mean to the readers. Then I tried to really find the title that can represent what the collection was all about, CJ.
Okay. While the world was on lockdown last year, I was wondering, were you able to work on new poetry for probably book two, or was there a different way that you handled last year's lockdown?
Last year it was kind of a different way. I still have a second manuscript coming along. But last year, what I tried to engage into would be Instagram poetry. I felt at that time I needed to have a platform that can access more readers, because I decided that launching a poetry book when things are really going crazy and the pandemic's a lot of limitations won't be appropriate, at least for me. So what
Mm-hmm.
what I did is to really try writing short form poetry. I think that's something that they call now as IG poems. Those
Yeah.
3 5 short lines poetry.
Right,
So
right.
right now I'm managing Pyramus Poetry at Pyramus Poetry on Instagram, and it's something that's really new to me last year, which I still try to maintain up to this point.
All right. Pyramus. That's a separate Instagram account than from your own personal account, of course.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, since also the world was on lockdown last year, let's delve a little bit into productivity, because there was so much toxicity in talks about productivity that if you sat down on your butt last year and you did not do anything with your time, let's say you were not creative at all during last year, you have wasted a golden opportunity. Do you feel that there's something true to that? Because the debate regarding productivity is also polarizing. Some people are saying that how could you even think of productivity last year when everyone was really, the world was on hold? And then at the same time, there will be other people feel that you're not making use of the time that was given to you, so you fail.
Yeah, that I think that's a really polarizing subject. But to me, productivity in general has to be something that goes with us in a very conscious and cautious manner. Meaning, productivity, I don't think is dictated by any type of situation. Of course, in different situations we have to be a little more sensitive, but I think individually, even both as an artist or just a regular individual, we always would want to strive to be as productive as possible in the time that's given to us. That's me coming from someone who believes that time is such a scarce gift, not even a commodity, as some would say. It's really a gift that you have to take advantage of. Productivity in that sense is would not only mean in terms of our creative pursuits, in terms of our probably readings, learnings, growth, but just taking time to try to maximize the hours, the days that are given to us.
Mhm.
But I wouldn't say that not being productive would equate to really wasting time, not unless I feel like you're really someone who literally didn't try to do anything and just really dilly dallied and just became potato couch. I think in that sense, someone might be feeling should be feeling a little guilty, you know.
Right, right. I mean, last year you see people who either gained weight or lost weight during the lockdown. So some people are also basing it on that. If you gain weight, then that means you didn't do anything but just sit on your butt and you watch TV and you nibble on chips and you marathon Netflix, or you did not neglect your physical well-being, and because you didn't have to go to work, you need to do a little bit of movement and exercise at home and burn the calories that you take in. But that's a whole different
Agree.
debate for people to look into, and that's not what we're here for. So writers, be they fiction or nonfiction, have this thing as word count. So regardless of the number of words that you've written or you've made, you could say that it is a self-imposed rule that creatives use in order to track or measure your progress. So I was wondering, as poets, do you do the same thing?
Well, for poets, I guess, especially for those poets who really have a lot of respect to poetic forms, I
Mm-hmm.
think it's not only as a form of discipline, but as a form of understanding of the poetic art. Meaning, word count would matter not only in terms of brevity as one of the requirements for a poem, but in terms of really becoming true to a form that you're trying to develop. So, for example, if you're writing in a simplest example, if you're writing a haiku, you'd want to, of course, have 575 syllables. So you
Mm-hmm.
can just write any amount of words. Same is true when you're writing a classic sonnet form. So meaning those who probably read a lot of Shakespeare would know that it's they call it I think a iambic in terms of the flow of each syllables, but it's
Yeah.
also with 10 syllables normally in each line. So if that's the case, I think word count does not only serve as a form of discipline, but as a form of actual creative endeavor. So it's also different when you try to write more complex forms. One of my more favorite, but one of the most difficult poetic forms that I try to write is what they call sestina. So
Mm.
I hope I remember it correctly, but it's basically a poetic form that you need to identify seven ending words right at the onset, and then you'll recognize that those seven ending words would be the same ending words in all of the stanzas, but used interchangeably. So like
That
those
sounds
words
like
will
a
always have
very
to be there.
challenging venture if you decide to write it in that way. That's like it's a
It is.
conscious effort, I'm sure. And you can't just totally give in to the subconscious and just it's like automatic writing and say, okay, I'll just write whatever it comes to mind, and no, nothing
Yeah,
like
I agree. I agree.
yeah.
But as a
Um,
practice, I think I'd still let words, learn words to fly out and just try to put the discipline and the form structure later on. That can also work.
Okay. Last topic on productivity. If let's say you thought about the verse in your head, you committed it to memory, but you have not written it down because you have 100% great memory. You don't need to write everything down the moment that you think of it. Will you still call that productivity?
To me, I think that's a crime for poets or writers in general. It's always difficult. I've had so many instances where a line or an idea for a verse or a title for a poem comes out. Normally, I would really have 110% jot it down, whether in a piece of paper or more conveniently in your cell phone, because sometimes as artists, you can never know when that idea can come back again. I
Yeah.
have this one poem. It's called Flyleaf. I had the idea, I remember, way back in college, but I was only able to write it several years after. So, if you have it in you, if it's there, if you can actually go and pause for a moment and give time to that work of art that's coming out of you, I think that's something that we all have to do as artists.
Right. Right. If you can finish it the moment that you created it, then great. If not, then again, take the time to go back to it. Yeah. So
Agree, GJ.
there there are about different forms of poetry. There was like 15 the last time I checked. These would range from some of the ones that you mentioned, from blank verse, which is mostly iambic. There's also rhymed, free verse, narrative, epic, haiku, sonnet. When you started writing, was there ever a conscious choice as to which form you felt was right for each poem, or do you have a specific favorite form?
Thank you for that question. To be honest, I don't think I had an inclination to any types of poetic forms when I was starting. When I was starting, it's all about having a rhymes. It's all about having words that sound nice and well. But of course, as I tried to hone my craft, I would say I got more in love with sonnet number one. Haiku is another one, and then Sestina and Villanelle. So those are my top four poetic forms that I really love. But that didn't happen right at the beginning. So it turned out with all my poetic readings, when you encounter a certain poem and then you don't just read it. Normally, I read it several times. So I read first to see the surface, second to find the meaning, and then third to try and understand what was the syntax behind the poem. So
Right.
those forms that I mentioned appealed to me in that way. When you read it, normally poetic forms will have an added impact and experience to the material. So like how I do it with my sonnets, I'd always indent my two lines as
Mm-hmm.
how Shakespeare would do it to put emphasis. And even my rhyming patterns would also be something like Shakespeare, A B A B C D C D, and so on. So to answer, those are my forms that I learned to love and learned to really try and craft. Sonnet, sestina, villanelle, and haiku. But when I was starting, I didn't even realize those terms exist. For all transparency, I'm not even a master's in fine art or creative writing person back in college. But with my interest with poetry, with my love for the craft, I really got to learn those and then tried to hone how to write those specific poetic forms, CJ.
Yeah, and if you, and as I say, if you really make the time to go into something that you feel that you're very much drawn to, then you'll make up for it for whatever lack of, you know old school learning that you may think that you're supposed to have, like be in a classroom or whatever, or take up a seminar on poetry. You make that up with your own effort to delve into the material and into the writing style. I'm sure that a lot of listeners right now, or viewers, have gotten curious as to how you write, or what does your writing sound like. Can we request for you to read something off your book?
Yeah, of course. I'd love to. Maybe as a, I'm not sure, but to me it's a cheat. I can probably write something from my upcoming book.
Oh,
So
great!
it's something that I so it's
Whatever you can
something that
share with us right now, that would be perfect.
okay. So I'm someone who writes a lot of poems that really affect the heartstrings. So this
Mm-hmm.
is one of the poems that I really love from my new collection. It's called Waiting Room.
Okay.
So I will read it for you, CJ, and for all your listeners. Waiting room. I stay even if everyone else has gone home. I cannot take the idea of leaving you. Though the nurse insists, I remain restless by continuing to sleep on these cold, tiled, and dull floors, boxed by plainly painted walls. Still, I stay, waiting for a miracle to arrive. In desperation, gasping becomes normal in hours that I chase an elusive calmness. I tell the nurse all is well, and I'd rather wait alone. Of course, I did not tell her when lights are gone, I sleep in pain. At the first sign of the daylight, I make sure there are no marks of my tears on the floor. That's waiting room. And yeah,
Ah, good.
that
That is
felt
good.
different, CJ. Huh?
That is good. When I actually saw the imagery, based on what you read, and I guess that answered my question when I asked you earlier that, do you feel that poetry can actually bring uh, a reader into a different space, different headspace, or create in their mind's eye an image that you want to convey. And you successfully did with just that
Oh,
short piece
thank you.
called Waiting Room. So yeah, great, 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 great.
Thank you, CJ. That was a different experience. I haven't read the poem in quite a while. So thanks
Well,
for
we're
having me. That's
honored
great,
to have been
CJ.
the first person to have heard it. So yeah, great. I know this particular view is probably going to sound archaic, but there are still some people out there who feel that poetry is not poetry unless there is rhyming involved. So how do you address when you come across people who feel that way?
Well, thanks for that, CJ. But I guess poetry is a literary form that is not as mainstream as the other literary genre, particularly in the Philippines. I could say that because that was my own experience when I did publish my first poetry collection. But I think it would really just have to take a lot of patience from those who really understand it and a lot of effort to try and educate those who don't really understand it. But to answer that specific question, poetry has evolved a lot throughout the generations of people writing poetry. In fact, there's one form already that we use in the contemporary poetry, which we call free verse, as you might probably be
Yes,
familiar with,
reverse.
CJ.
Yeah.
So it's really a type of poetry that you are not required to have any rhyme at all. So to answer that, I think people who have that perception might find it important to also understand that there are quite a lot of elements that make up a poetry. As you said, imagery is one, the syntax is another, the messaging and the brevity is another one, the
Hmm.
urgency would always be part of poetry. The line breaks do a lot in terms of de- developing a poetry. In fact, if you probably see how Waiting Room was written, it might be different from the way I read it, because reading a poetry is also different from speaking or saying a poetry. So I guess it's really just a matter of understanding that they might not be as interested to poetry as others will. So if I ever encounter those types of people, I think I'd be more than glad to share stuff about poetry. So to everyone listening, I hope you consider that poetry is not just all about rhyming, but it plays a big part, at some point. There are so many poetic forms also that really require rhyming, CJ.
Right. Chanting is one of them, especially if you're a witch and you want to cast a spell. The rhyme will make the spell, stick to your head a little bit more than not.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
Is
interesting.
there a time of day where you sit down to write? It's like, oh,
Yeah.
or some people like, nah, I don't have coffee yet. Don't talk to me. I can't write. Or I haven't eaten my breakfast. Get out of here.
Well, to me, I think in terms of my creative endeavors, it's always been at night time. So my writing process normally is I did really want to quiet down, make sure that all the errands, all the tasks for the day are completely inside the drawer, if I may. And it's normally between 10 p.m. up to 12 midnight or even
Mhm.
later part of that evening. So to me, I like to write when all the other stuff, all the other obligations and things in my regular daily life is done for the day, so I can really concentrate into my artistry. But in terms of my process, coffee helps, but that one is really more for my morning routine, not at night. But
Yeah.
I'd normally want to read, a couple of pieces randomly
I'm here.
from my poetry. Oh, good for you. So when I read and then just to set the tone for me, normally I also like to just stare stare blankly and then just let it come to you. But yeah, and then I'd like to write. When I started writing, I never really wrote my pieces in a notebook, primarily because I felt that my handwriting wasn't beautiful. So, seeing the draft doesn't even
You're
inspire
not
me
the
that
only one.
alone.
My mom hates my handwriting too. She calls it chicken scratches. So yeah.
Yeah, we're the same. We're the same. But yeah, but towards the latter part of my poetic journey, I've learned to value the handwritten draft. So now I try that. So in terms of process, it's mainly at night, and then I'd like to read a couple of pieces, no matter who the poet is and no matter where it is. But I'd love to normally pick up a book and read some pieces, and then just try to write. Either I have a piece already in mind, or just try to let the words come out. Or normally, my I think my best pieces came out when I felt that it was a must for me to write a poem.
Mm-hmm.
It's either I have something in my heart that I want to deal with, but I don't know how exactly, or if it's a thought or an experience that I want to find more clarity. So normally, in my experience, when I write a poem, I leave it there, and then when I read it, sometimes it doesn't even feel like I was the one who wrote that poem. So
Yeah,
that's how my process
it's
begins.
usually like that when you take a step back after having written something and you reread it again, like maybe a week after or even a month after, you wonder, wow, who wrote this? Was this me? Because
Exactly.
it's like a different switch turns on when you write, and then another one turns itself back on again differently this time when you read it. So yeah, where do you take inspiration from?
Well, it in my experience, it's a lot of personal encounters. Meaning,
Hmm.
I take my inspiration from my feelings, either by my personal solitary moments or by the eventualities that are happening around me. Like I think it's okay for me to share. Like Waiting Room is a poem that came out when I was experiencing something difficult, when a loved one was sick and
Hmm.
was hospitalized. So
Okay,
that's the title, Waiting Room. So
that's called
normally
waiting.
I take inspiration. Yeah, I take inspiration from things that really affect me in a very significant way. But sometimes I also just try to take a certain inspiration, either a line or a song or someone, even if it's not really someone who became part of my life. But sometimes I try to make it as a fictional approach as well, but in a poetic manner. So in terms of inspiration, I'd say a lot of personal experiences, and then on seldom occasion, I also just try to make it a creative pursuit by just finding a muse whenever I can find it.
Okay, hang in for a moment. I'm just gonna reach over to my shelf and read something to you. My turn to read something back to
Oh,
you.
please! Wow,
Um,
thank you.
this is actually everyone knows the author Anne Rice, and she was married to her husband Stan Rice, who is a poet, and more often than not, she would use different sections of his work as a prologue to her own work. So I want to grab a book and read one to you um, and see how this one strikes you. Okay. Let me shut the music for a bit. This is like extemporaneous. I'd never thought I'd actually be reading something to you, but since you know we're reading to
Even
you,
if you know what I did, right? Okay.
it's yeah. This is taken from Queen of the Damned, and the poem is called "Tragic Rabbit."
Wow.
Tragic Rabbit, and this is from a collection that's called Some Lamb back in 1975. Yikes, 1975. Okay, so I don't know what you will make of this when I read it. You probably would be able to categorize it as in what form it comes in, but I'll do my best to read
Yes,
it.
please.
Okay, Tragic Rabbit. Tragic Rabbit. A painting. The caked ears green like rolled corn. The black forehead pointing at the stars. A painting on my wall, alone. As rabbits are and aren't. Fat red cheek, all art. Trembling nose, a habit hard to break as not. You too can be a tragic rabbit, green and red. your back, blue, your manly little chest. But if you've ever goaded into being one, beware the true flesh. It will knock you off your tragic horse and break your tragic colors like a ghost. Breaks marble, your wounds will heal, so quickly water. Will be jealous. Rabbits on white paper painted outgrow all charms against their breeding wild, and their rolled corn ears become horns. So watch out if the tragic life feels fine, caught in that rabbit trap. All colors look like sunlight swords, and scissors like the living Lord. Yeah, there you go.
Wow.
Yeah, so
Wow.
so that's how he writes. So what do you make of it?
Well, first of all, wow, that's really something. I haven't read. First of all, thank you for that, CJ. And I must admit, I haven't really read a full blown poetry for some time now. So that's a relief. In terms of poetic form, it's really difficult to identify a
Okay.
poetic form without you really seeing the actual form, right? But what I make of it would be obviously it's a really sad poem.
Yeah.
She used repetition as a technique quite a
Right.
lot across the piece. I probably heard the word tragic for at least four times, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But
Right.
but I also love how she tries he tries to situate the premise of the poem,
Mm-hmm.
where it becomes very personal. So well, to me, this is how I read poems or how I listen to poems. To me, it gave me that image that while there was a lot of other images, the main image is really that person or the persona of the poem being inside the place where he can be alone, and then those images are coming out. So
Mm-hmm.
that's one thing, in terms of what I got as a setting. But obviously, it's a very sad poem, and how he used tragic rabbit as the common image across the piece, because he'll mention other types of rabbit there, or describe the tragic rabbit, bring you to different world of that rabbit or different types of rabbit, which seems to sound mundane if you just talk about rabbit in any other day, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if you
Yeah.
talk about
Right.
but if you talk about who even thinks about a tragic rabbit in the first place?
Right.
So
Right. Like
to me, I
makes you
got a
wonder
lot of
what does a rabbit think of, or how does rabbit
yeah.
what
So
yeah.
that's really intriguing. Just the fact that he used tragic rabbit. In fact, I'd like to believe that the first time I heard of that phrase, tragic rabbit. But to me, it dealt with also a lot of um, life situations, if I may,
Yeah.
and how one and in different stages of scenarios or circumstances can relate to either allowing yourself to be something like that tragic rabbit, who will make you fall off the horse, those things that I heard from it. But one thing also that I find, as an experience with poem, is sometimes you read a piece, you don't really get to explain it in words that you want to, but you just feel that there's an impact and a lingering experience from that piece. That's something that I experience. And normally, to me, a great poem is a piece that, although that's also a debate for some, but a great poem would always allow you to read back through it. Not because you try, not because you try so much that that poem is no longer accessible, but because there's a lot of meaning within that poem that the reader would want to go back to it. I hope I'm making sense, CJ.
Yeah, you are. You are. You are. And for any other poet out there who's listening, I'm sure that made more sense to them as well. But you know
I
what?
hope so.
Regardless, but regardless of where in the spectrum you follow or you fall under, as a creative, one thing that's part of a creative process is, apart from making sure that your words mean something, is also managing your time. So, I was wondering, can you share any time management tips for our viewers or listeners who are thinking of going at this, whether as a career or as a hobby? Hobby, probably yes. As a career, I've heard, or I've also talked to a lot of poets who are more into the spoken word form. So
Mm-hmm.
there seems to be a rise in spoken word poetry as well. So I'm sure they will have their own time management tips that work for them. But what other tips do you think that you can share that has worked for you, that other people might actually be thinking of using that might also work for them?
Thanks for that, CJ. To me, it's really the commitment to set time. Whatever time works for you. It's either 15 minute each morning or 30 minutes before you go to sleep. But
Hmm.
set time both to read and to write. So that's something that has worked for me. Other way to do it is set a day for you. I know as individuals, as professionals, or as family people, or whatever situation we are in, there's always a lot of life demands. But to me, it's really setting up a committed time or a day for it. In my case, when I was really trying to write a book, I'd normally dedicate a portion of my Sunday to just go out. Way back then, to just go out and go to a cafe
Yeah.
that has little people, or I mean, super less number of people in them, and just write. To me, it's really a matter of allocating time. It doesn't have to be an hour, it doesn't have to be 2 hours, doesn't have to be half day, whatever time works for you. And it also varies, depends on the amount of work that you're trying to produce. In my case, and it was already a book, I really made sure that every single night I'd spend at least 2 hours or more producing content. I mean, poetry, editing it, writing it. I think those are the two things that you'd want to do in your writing career if you want to pursue it as a career. So in all other things, just set time, plan your day, plan your schedule. If you can plan it 2 3 days ahead, that might be better. But at the minimum, you might want to plan it at least the night before, and then tell yourself if it works for you, put it also in your calendar so it's blocked off in your day that says writing time or reading time. Those have worked wonders for me in the past and even until now, CJ.
Right. And if you can't find the time to plan, you may want to ask someone to plan for you.
Yeah, that can work too, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. And if you can't find a person who can plan the plan for you, then why don't you just plan to slap yourself in the face and hopefully knock
That
some
might be the
sense.
last resort.
Yeah, knock some sense into yourself so that you get to planning. So,
Yeah.
what's next for you, Leo?
Well, to me, three things probably personal wise. I actually recently just got married, as you probably know,
Yeah,
CJ.
yes.
We're friends
Congrats,
in social
congrats.
media.
I don't know. I wasn't sure if you wanted to delve into that, but yeah, since you mentioned it, so yeah, congrats, congrats.
Oh, thank you, CJ. So that's one thing, it's really very exciting to try to start family life. Professionally, I'm no longer with the corporate world, so I'm really trying to make an impact with my career by being a startup founder and CEO, and hopefully grow the company with the vision that we have for it, which is to become the branding and communications company for those who dare to dream big. So, meaning for people who really have ideas, business ideas, brand ideas that they want to pursue. We'd love to be the company that will be instrumental also in helping them out.
Mhm.
Lastly, in terms of my creative pursuit, I still have my second book manuscript on the shelf. So I think with you inviting me over, that might be a sign for me to pull that out and then try to plan, as you said, plan and hopefully get to still publish it
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
in the coming months. So
Yeah,
that's it for me, CJ.
the mere fact that you got one book out and you still have one more waiting in the wings to be finished and published, that spells productivity for me. And so, pat on the back for you.
Thank you.
uh, a
Thank you
job
so
well
much.
done. So where can they find more about you and your work on social media?
Yeah, thanks, CJ. Well, professionally, in terms of what I do in the company, they can look for me, Leonard Grape in LinkedIn, Grape underscore Leo on Instagram. Our company is the Vineyard Brand Consultancy, so we have our website www.thevineyarddc.com, or they can also look us up at Instagram at the Vineyard DC. For my poetic works, I'm currently managing Pyramus Poetry, so they can just look it up over the Instagram page, and then they'll find some of my online works there. So
All
there,
right.
CJ.
But I'm going to be typing all of that onto the show notes so that people can just, click away and go visit and go bug you on LinkedIn if they want a job.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Leo, thank you so much. That is a wrap for today. I wish you well in your second book of poetry, and not just your second, but your third, your fourth, and your fifth, because I know that more books will be published. And you seem to be the champion of time management for me, and I'm sure that will be something that will come in very, very handy, and if not easy to you, but also very handy to people who have heard of how you manage your time and how you manage to squeeze in still with that same amount of passion and creativity at the end of the working day. So till the next episode, thank you so much, Leo. And for everyone else, keep creating, and we shall keep reading, and we shall keep listening. So stay safe, stay creative, and namaste. Thank you. Bye, everyone.